Hello, good morning, everyone. This is Irfan Mohammad from Alpha Data, and I'm the cloud solution architect here. So thank you all for joining today, taking your time for attending this webinar. So I will quickly share my screen and I'll walk you through what exactly we have on deck today for you all. Great. I hope you all are able to see my screen now. And basically, I would like to thank everyone to taking your time to join this call. I think we have a lot of participants today, and the main agenda basically was to introduce you to one of our uh, specialization in terms of cloud advanced integrated security of Alpha Data. And we have collaborated with Fortinet and Microsoft to fix this agenda of the meeting. So as you can see on the agenda, what we were going to discuss today is on the cloud journey and the security concerns which it has when you start adopting the cloud technologies. We'll also discuss something about how you can protect your cloud workloads when you're so much accustomed with your on-premise workloads protection. You should also be knowing something about how you can protect the cloud workload. So we thought of bringing that topic as well. And we will discuss in brief or probably a little bit on a higher level how you can create a security baseline on the cloud. So this security baseline will be one of the important aspect where you can start adopting the cloud. But before you even adopt the cloud, you should understand what baseline you will be having on the cloud that needs to be fulfilled before you move your workloads there. Right. And I will also mention something about our collaboration with Microsoft and Fortinet, which is basically a game changer. And I'll walk you through one of our marketplace offering that has to do with cloud advanced integrated security solution. So it's kind of a concise solution mixed up with not only the licenses or the computing or the consumption, but also with some of the implementation services as well as managed services as well. So it's a pretty interesting offer to see, and I'll walk you through that in detail as well with the benefits of it, post completing all the discussions on the cloud journey aspects. And then also we'll take some of the question and answers as well. So I think we are good to go. Moving on to the next slide. So what you see in this slide is basically discussing the considerations the customer keep in mind when they try to move on to the cloud, right? On the left side of the screen, what you see is cloud adoption consideration. Now, every customer will be having their own perspective of why they want to adopt cloud, right? Some would like to adopt the cloud because of the demand optimization it can generate. When some of the customers like to optimize cloud because they would want to move away from the data centers and the server rooms concept and probably adapt more of a flexible approach in terms of adopting cloud, right? So there can be many reasons why you want to adopt cloud and what are the considerations you have taken in your business model. And I have listed down those as you can see from the left side of the screen. So the main aspect here, if I talk about cloud consideration, is of course the intelligent automation which you have, the data residency challenges which you have, and also the cloud first mindset. So keeping on all these considerations in mind, customers moves on to a journey of the cloud. But with every journey of adoption to the cloud, there's also concerns which have been raised. And I have presented those concerns in the right side of my screen. So I'm not going to go through all the concerns, but I would like to point out three important concerns which have been discussed more often by many of our customers here. One is the defining the cost strategy. Second is defining the operational model strategy for the cloud adoption, and third is a security strategy. So there are other aspects as well, like modernizing your application, adopting a DevOps mindset, talking about the cloud service and the cloud networking strategy as well. I won't go through in detail to that, but the subject of this webinar would focus mainly on security strategy. But I would like to talk about defining cost strategy and operation model strategy as well. So when I talk about the costing strategy, we know we are moving from capex to opex model, and we are adapting a subscription-based model in our on-premises now, as well as in terms of licensing, right? So that aspect has kept us at the bay and to decide whether we should adopt cloud technology or not. There are so many tools right now in the market which can help you to optimize your cost spending, optimize your cost spending in the cloud. Not only that, they also have certain native tools in the Azure for the cost management as well, which you can very well use. But customers are basically stuck how they should adopt the cost. Whether they should go with a single subscription, whether they should go with the multiple subscriptions model, what exactly they need to do. And the second most important aspect is the operational model strategy. And if you know, today in our data centers, we are very much accustomed to that model of ITL framework where you have multiple teams, you have incident management, you have a problem management team, you have a help desk team, you have a team for the Windows administration, you have team for the Linux administration, and you have a separate team for networking, security, backup, and storage as well. So there are many teams for every individual task which you perform on premises. But when it comes to cloud, the operation model is entirely different. You cannot adopt the same way the cloud has you adopted in your on-premises, right? So if you talk to a Azure administrator today, the administrator is capable of deploying the storage resources. He or she is capable of deploying the networking resources as well as the computing resources. So you cannot restrict the administrator skill set in deploying these different areas of your skill set, right? So you cannot put an Azure administrator just for a virtual machine or just for deploying some storage accounts, because the knowledge is vast and the cloud adoption is very easy. So it is very important to strategize your operation model when you're going to replicate your on-premise onto the cloud and then dividing the teams within that. So that is one of the concerns which we have seen from the customers, especially on the enterprise scale level. And the third concern so far is we have observed is security strategy. We very well know that on the on-premises you have multiple layers of security, but do you also know how can you create a baseline of security on your cloud? Is it the same as what you have in the on-premises, or is it entirely different? What are the points where you have to stop in and think that, okay, I need this and I wouldn't be needing this, or do I need to replicate my entire security baseline from on-premise to cloud as well? So these are some of the concerns which customers have raised, and I would like to address those concerns in this webinar. And just to before I begin with other technical subjects as well in this particular call, I hope all the audiences who are here in this call have already started assessing the Azure cloud or any other cloud in their infrastructure, or they're planning to move to it, or either they are already moved towards the cloud and still thinking how we can streamline that. So this is for those target already audiences who will probably able to understand the coming slides as well. Going on to the next slide, what I'm trying to show here is how you can protect your workloads in the cloud compared to the on-premises. So on the left side, I'll go point by point by pointing out each and every security layer on the on-premises, and we will see whether we have the similar security layer on the cloud, or it can be built on the cloud, right? So if I talk about the DDoS protection first, you have a DDoS protection layer on the on-premises, but you also have a DDoS protection layer enabled in the virtual network level in the Azure cloud. Now, this is a native solutions of the Azure. You have a standard DDoS protection, but if you don't want to use that, if you want to use more in detail and probably go with the infrastructure as service model, then you have a third-party products which are there in the marketplace of the Azure that you can use for the DDoS protection. I'm not going to name any vendor here whose DDoS protection you should use, but I would say this, that there's a network virtual appliance available that can enable you to have a DDoS protection similar to what you have here in your on-premises as well, if you don't want to go with the native solution of the Azure. So the next layer is the perimeter firewall. You build a perimeter firewall in your on-premise security layer, but you also have a firewall capability inside the Azure, which is Azure Firewall. But if you don't want to go with the Azure Firewall, because it's generally a PaaS service, it's a platform as a service model. It's not as you run in your infrastructure. So there are options in the marketplace of the Azure that will help you to achieve this perimeter firewall configuration through the NVAs. There are multiple security vendors with the highest level of industry expansion. They have these solutions in the Azure marketplace, and they also have it via bring your own license model. So this thing is also achievable. And then you also have IP IDS solutions. You have a similar IPS IDS solution with the third-party security vendors. Now, Azure has certain solutions native to it, but not a full-fledged IPS IDS solution. So you would be needing a NVA definitely in the Azure for the IPS IDS solutions from a third-party security vendors. And of course, sandboxing is also one of the solution, but you don't have right now in the Azure, so you have to depend on the NVA for that, which is nothing but a third-party security product. And SSL, IPsec, and VPN tunneling. We of course have a VPN gateway in the Microsoft Azure, which will is used for site-to-site connectivity and point-to-site connectivity with the IPsec tunnel support as well. So if I go layer by layer of the on-premises, you always have a counter technology in the Azure, which is native to the security layer. And if it's not native to the security layer, it also has a feasibility or a flexibility to deploy a third party through the Azure virtual machines, and then you can expand your security layer similar to what you have in your on-premises as well. So if I also talk about the SIEM solution, right? This is also one interesting aspect. Azure Sentinel is one of the SIEM solution they currently support, which is native solution of the Azure. It does not only support the cloud workload, but it also supports the on-premises workloads to the connectors, and it also supports multiple workloads in the on-premises, not just the virtual machine, but also the firewalls and the network switches, etc. Azure has a list of sub integrated supports that is available in the internet as well. So if you don't want to go with the Azure Sentinel, you can actually go with other third-party SIEM solution and integrate it with your virtual machines on the Azure. Even that support is available. So the idea here is that you don't have to worry that my on-premise I don't have a way to replicate my entire security layer which is there on premises into Azure. You do have a way. You just have to build it basing on your needs and your experience. You might want to go with the native solutions, or you would like to go with the third party solutions. It's totally up to you, and we as an alpha data, as a system integrator, will be able to provide you that recommendations as well. And coming back to this slide, the reason I wanted to bring up this slide is because before I jump on to the next slide discussing about the security layer, the security baseline on the Azure, I wanted to walk you through a subject of management groups, what exactly it is, and how it is related to the subscription and the resources in your environment, and how it is related to security as well. Okay, so what for the customers who have a concept that who understand the concept of Azure tenant very nicely, it'll be very easy for them to understand this particular slide as well. But for the customers who don't understand what exactly a Azure tenant is, what exactly a subscription is, then this might be of interest to you, right? So what you see on this particular slide is there is your Azure Active Directory with the Azure admin roles, and we call it as Azure Active Directory tenant. Now, this tenant does not need any subscription at all for running any workloads. It does not run any workloads there, no virtual machines, no computing, etc. They only have the identities hosted in this particular tenant. And what happens is you can actually link a tenant, you can actually link a subscription to this particular tenant, and the layer which you see below is basically a baseline wherein you'll be hosting your subscription. But before you host your subscription, there are some controls which you need to put in place. So those controls should be on the root level of your tenant. So what you do, you create a management group first. This management group will be linked to your Azure tenant. It is not having any subscription as of now where you can run the resources. It's only a security kind of a group that is linked to your root tenant. And what exactly it does is it will be able to apply certain governance policies like your resource-based access controls or your Azure policies, which will restrict the user to perform certain tasks. The task can be something like, if you don't want the end user to deploy a virtual machine on the cloud with a public IP address, you can apply Azure policy on that particular task, right? And if you don't want a end user to deploy a virtual machine in any of the region apart from the UAE region, you're restricting the deployment to a certain region only. You can do it using the Azure policies, right? So there's RBAC controls and there's Azure policies, and you decide to have a governance model in such a way that your global governance model should be on a root tenant. So you apply the policy on the root tenant, and then you create a root management group, and then you create a sub management group. Now sub management group can be multiple groups. It can be one or two or three or four, it depends. But these management groups will basically define what exactly you're hosting there as well. For example, you might be hosting a production workload, or you might be hosting a non-production workload, or you might be hosting no resources from a different group company as well. It depends upon your preferences. So you create a management group, underneath you will link your subscription. So this is where you will be actually hosting a subscription. You will be linking with the management group, and under the subscription you will be having a resource group, and under the resource group you will be having the resources. So this is basically the hierarchy which you need to understand before you create any baseline, or if you talk, even not create, but even if you want to talk about any security baseline and the Azure, you need to understand the concept behind the management groups and what is the hierarchy of a subscription, and what is the hierarchy of a resource group, and then the resources. So when you have this clear understanding, you'll be able to discuss more on this subject and how to control certain aspects in your Azure tenant right. I hope it is clear. I'll move on to the next slide. The next slide will discuss on the baseline architecture of the Azure, how you're going to start with the baseline architecture. The reason why it is very important is because many of you might have already started assessing the resources, deploying the resources on the Azure. You might have started deploying certain POCs. You might have started deploying certain applications on the Azure, which is a single application or multiple application as well. You're just trying to taste the cloud, and you are trying to understand how the cost mechanism is, right? You're at that particular point. And many of you have already moved some production workloads as well, right? But when you move a single production workload, you try to expand it in a later stage, but you are stuck with few points. You are stuck with few challenges, that how do I segregate my storage resources? How do I segregate my DNS? How do I segregate my other shared services? What exactly I need to do? You are stuck with that. And then you start migrating that production workload to some other subscription or some other resource group, and things get clumsy, right? So before you do any of those things, it is very important for you and your team to understand that you need to create a baseline first in the Azure, and then you start with all these other aspects, right? So we were at the point where we were discussing about how important is creating a baseline on the Azure when you start deploying your resources, right? So on the right side, basically, we have your on-premises. Sorry, on the left side, we have your on-premises network. You have your headquarters, you have your secondary site as well, and you have some of your end users who are working from home, connecting through the VPN client, and you also have some applications published over the internet. This is a very basic and a high level model which we thought of discussing. And then what you do, you are trying to expand your resources on the Azure. You're trying to deploy certain services which are critical to your business on the Microsoft Azure or any other cloud, right? So what you do, you create a baseline. Now, the baseline, as discussed earlier, should start with a management group. So you create a management group here. In the earlier slide, we have seen creating only one management group, but what we are showing here is three different management groups. So there's a hub management group, and there is non-prod management group and a prod management group. So in the non-prod and prod, basically you'll deploy your workloads which are day one test, and in the production you deploy your workload which are production workloads. But the hub management group is very interesting. This is where you actually deploy your shared services. The shared services will be your firewall, your DNS, your Active Directory. So whatever the services which is being used by your entire application or team on any other services in your environment, Hub will be hosting that. So the topology here is the hub and spoke topology. I will discuss that once I complete the entire slide. But the initial stage of creating a baseline architecture starts with your management group, right? And then you start linking the subscription to the management group. Many of your customers here might think that, if I have just only one Azure subscription, it is sufficient for me to just deploy all the resources and create that baseline. Yes, you're right, it is possible to do that as well. But the challenges here is, in your environment, you are just in your environment, you have the IT workloads. You also have workloads which are application based or business based, right? So it is very in some organization, what happens is the cost centers for the IT and the cost center for the application or the R&D team, whatever we call that, right, is different. So if you want to restrict the cost centers, then how are you going to manage the cost of the subscription with a single subscription? You cannot do that. You need to have multiple subscription for each and every cost center, so that it makes your life easy in managing the cost or managing the budget of your organization in terms of multiple business units, right? So what we recommend is you need to have a separate subscription for each workload or each type of work, each type of business unit. And what we're showing here is basically we have a subscription for the production, we have a subscription for the non-production workloads, and we have a subscription for the shared services as well. I wouldn't call it as hub subscription. I would call it as a shared services subscription if needed, right? So once you link the management group with the subscription, you then deploy your resource groups. Your resource groups are nothing but a logical containers in which you will be going to host all of your services. These services are called as resources in the Azure, and these resources will can be either of a computing in nature, or networking in nature or storage in nature. It can be any type of resources, right? So these resources will be deployed. So what we have done is, before you even deploy the resources, you need to create a baseline of virtual networking, right? You have to create a VNets in such a way that you have a separate VNet for your dev, you have a separate VNet for your test environment, you have a separate VNet for your production environment, and you have a separate virtual network for your shared services, right? And what happens is, all of your dev, test, and production are isolated VNets. They will not be able to communicate with each other, but they need to communicate with your shared services. So you establish a VNet peering. You establish a VNet peering with your shared services, which is called as a hub and spoke topology, right? Your hub is your hub VNet, and you have your spoke VNets, which is dev, test, and production. So once this is done, this is where your baseline has been created of the Azure, and then you move on to creating the subnets within them for deploying the resources. Now in the shared VNet, or in the shared subscription or up subscription, we can see we have a subnet for the firewall, we have management subnet, we have a subnet for the SIEM integration, we have a subnet for the WAF for publishing our workloads over the internet. Now, what I have showed you right now is having a single hub with both your WAF subnet and firewall subnet sitting on the same VNet. But some customers would prefer to have a different VNet for that. You need to have a VNet separately for a private network, and you will be having a VNet for a public network as well. So it depends upon your preferences. But this is basically a baseline. And then you establish this particular baseline with your on-premises using a site-to-site tunnel. And for the VPN, you use a point-to-site VPN tunnel. And for the connection for the internet applications, for the applications that are published over the internet, you'll be using a WAF subnet. So this is the overall baseline that you need to consider when you deploy the resources on the Azure, and when you're trying to connect your Azure with the on-premises network as well. And it is very important for you to understand, for because today when you leave out, you might already have this sort of structure in place, but you might not be having a management group structure in place, or you might not be having a segregation of subscription in place. So I hope this is taken in a way that it will be helpful for you as well. Now, moving on to the next slide, I've just showed you the baseline. Now I would like to show you how the applications are placed in when you talk about a three-tier business application, right? So you have your on-premises network, and you have your application that needs to be published over the internet, and then you create your hub. In the hub network, you already have your NVAs deployed. So if you can see here, you have a private DMZ in and out, and you have a public DMZ in and out. Both are sitting in the same VNet, and your public DMZ is basically where your WAF will be hosted, and your private DMZ is basically where your firewall will be hosted, which will be connected with your on-premises network. So once your hub is ready, then you establish your spoke VNets. In the spoke VNet, you can see there is your three-tier application, which is having a web tier, business tier, and data tier. And in the spoke VNet 2, you're seeing app services and managed SQL, which is basically a platform as a service model. Now, the spoke one VNet is infrastructure as a service model, right? Where you have a general virtual machines, which you are very familiar with, right? And in the spoke 2 VNet, you have PaaS services, which is a new technology. Many of us might not be familiar, or many of us might not be able to adapt still, right? But I thought of bringing this particular point is because when you establish the connection between them, what exactly happens is, your PaaS services also have a different connectivity with Microsoft's backbone network. There are certain services in the Microsoft that will keep this PaaS services running, and they extract some analytical data from these PaaS services to the Microsoft backbone network directly. You cannot control that traffic flow, and you cannot request Microsoft to allow the traffic to pass through your firewall as well. So it is very important for you to decide in your environment, if today you're going to choose a PaaS service, you should not allow the PaaS service to sit in the same VNet as your IaaS infrastructure as a service, right? Because your virtual machines, which are running in the Spoke One VNet, will be hosting the services whose traffic will pass through the firewall. but the PaaS service traffic might not pass through the firewall because it is connected with the Microsoft backbone network as well, right? So this subject is very important to understand, and you have to decide when you create a baseline on the early stages itself, how do you want to segregate your infrastructure as a service workloads as well as your platform as a service workloads for the future when you deploy the Azure workloads. All right. So this is about basically the creating a security fabric or a security layer in the Azure before you start deploying any of your resources. I hope this was more knowledgeable for you and was able to reach your expectation. Now, coming to the next slide, we are discussing something of more interesting subject. We are going to discuss about a collaboration with Microsoft and Fortinet. So as Alpha Data, you know that have been a system integrator for almost like 30 years now, which is 3 decades, and we have been doing very well in the UAE market especially. And we are also the Microsoft Gold partner, and we are also advanced specialized partner in the cloud technologies, one of the cloud technologies. So that gives us an added advantage in terms of being the most recommended solution provider in the UAE region. And apart from that, we are also advanced 40 partner as well in the UAE region. So what we have done, we have collaborated with Microsoft and Fortinet to create a solution offering that will help the customers to create this particular security baseline, what we have spoke about, and we'll also be able to help them to cover the entire journey as well. Now, moving on to the next slide is what is the offering talks about. We have a solution offering. This is basically called as Cloud Advanced Integrated Security, which is powered by Fortinet and Microsoft Cloud Adoption Framework guidance, right? And what you see here is two different packages. One is a standard package, which is called as Deploy Standard, and other is the enterprise package, which is Deploy Enterprise, right? We have two different packages for our customers, focusing on creating such models in the environment and helping them to achieve the cloud adoption which they were looking for, right? So if I before I discuss about this particular packages, I would like to take you through the assessment block, which is there on the very first. So what we do is we do a free 2 weeks assessment, which is basically for free. And in this assessment, we will assess your existing on-premises workloads, your whether it be on-premises, whether it be your cloud only or hybrid workloads, right? And we provide you the recommendations in your architecture. So what we do, suppose for today you have adopted certain technologies on the cloud, and you are not aware how you should go further from there on, right? So we will do a fit gap analysis. In the fit gap analysis, what we do, we provide you a clear report of what exactly is needed on the networking layer, what exactly is needed on the security layer, and what exactly is needed on the identity and access management and governance layer. So when we give you that particular report and give you the recommended architecture, you will be very clear of what you need to use. And basically from there on, if you want to if you want to release an RFP or RFQ to multiple vendors, you can do that as well. Or you would like to if you'd like to go with your implementation by your own team, if you have your skill set, you can go with that as well. So this will basically help you to build the framework which you want to, and then you can take the help of system integrator of your own team to deploy those services as well. So the assessment is very important before we start approaching on the standard and enterprise packages. So if I talk about the standard package separately, this is basically targeted for small and medium businesses with end user base of 100 to 500, right? And what we're trying to cover in the standard packages, trying to cover security layer, we are trying to cover the governance layer and the networking layer. We are not discussing about the identity and access management piece in here, right? We are only focusing on network security and governance, not the identity, right? So in the standard package, the cost which you see here, which is $37,000, it's a bundled price. And this not just includes any implementation services cost, it also includes the licensing and compute cost for the Azure services in the standard package. There are certain Azure services that is mandatory for you to deploy for the landing zone, right? So that licensing and computing cost will be covered in the same bundle cost. Apart from that, the implementation charges are also covered in the same bundle cost. And along with the implementation, you will be getting a remote annual support services for up to 25 virtual machines. So if you have a 25 virtual machines, after you deploy the standard package, then we'll be providing you support, remote annual support for entirely 1 year for 25 virtual machines. Now all these three things are already included in the same bundle price. And similarly, the same goes with the enterprise as well. In the enterprise, we are not only covering the networking, security, and governance like we covered in the standard, but we are also covering the automation, the identity, and the cost management as well. So the enterprise package is a little bit higher in terms of the pricing, but it covers the support of remote annual support of 50 virtual machines. So plus the licensing and compute cost will be higher in the enterprise because for the enterprise level of implementation, you require certain workloads with a much higher bandwidth in terms of firewall and etc. So all these things will be also be covered in the bundle price. Now you might be having a question that what all licensing and compute cost is being covered in this particular bundle. That benefits I'll explain you in the next slide. So this slide discusses about the standard package benefits. This is basically for a CSP based customer, not for the EA and enterprise customer. It's for the CSP based. So in the standard security package, if you're going to build a hybrid model, you will definitely need a site-to-site VPN. You will also be needing an Azure AD connect that needs to be synced to your AD users, right? And you will be hosting a secondary domain controller in the Azure. And plus, you need to have at least one web hosting PaaS service hosted in the Azure, and you need to have a FortiGate next generation firewall with HA integrated with Azure Security Center. So this is basically the standard security package. What Alpha Data will be offering you is this particular services that will be deployed into your environment free of cost in that bundle price. And the subscription commitment which you have to give in turn is a 12 months commitment on the Azure subscription. That means you have to be with us for 12 months, and all the deployed resources will be in the reserved instance model, especially the virtual machines. And this opportunity will be a subscription based licensing model. So when you request all these services from us, you basically get Azure credits, first month free usage for $1,000. So if you're for the 1 month consumption, what you're going to have 1,000 free credits you'll be getting for the first initial month. Plus you will be getting 2 public IP addresses free. So for the entire 1 year of duration, you'll be having public IP address consumption free, which is for 2 public IP addresses. And the tools and support which you get is basically FortiGate licenses, 60 days trial, plus the licensing cost is already covered in the bundle. So if you're going to purchase a FortiGate next generation firewall with HA, that part is already covered in the bundle pricing. So you don't have to pay additionally for that. And then you'll also have partner technical support, and you'll also have Azure landing zone design recommendation and implementation. So we will implement the landing zone for you as well. Whatever the landing zone, the baseline which I've showed you, right? That implementation part will be covered in the same bundle cost, and will also help you do assessment for the 20 virtual machines on the Azure. It's a free assessment to migrate 20 virtual machines, and apart from that, additional free support for migrating non-SAP workloads to Azure up to 10 VMs. So a standard package comes with a lot of benefit. It does not it not only provides it covers your licensing cost and the computing cost for the services which is there, but it also helps you to migrate 10 workloads in the Azure. It will also help you to implement the landing zone as well, and also plus provides you a remote annual support for 1 year. And there are certain conditions which we have highlighted here. In the VPN gateway, you need to have a VPN gateway with minimum one requirement. FortiGate next generation firewall series should be FG VM04V. This is basing on the number of users which you have, right? And supported platform for the workload migration will be a VMware and Hyper-V. So if there's any third party, if the platform is not here, VMware and Hyper-V, or it can be a Nutanix HSI as well, right? That time we need to use a third party migration tool. For that, we will be charging you for third party migration tool only for that. So all this, and again, for the final point, the detailed BOQ for bundled Azure services, you need to reach out to our team to understand what is the BOQ, what is the bill of quantity that we are going to provide you for in that bundle cost, what is going to cover in that bundle cost. So we'll be able to provide you those details once you reach out to our team. Interesting. So this is something for the standard package benefits. You also have something for the enterprise package benefits, similar to very much similar to the standard package. The only thing additional here is your Azure free credits for the first 1 month is $1,500 is free, and all the public IP addresses are free in your subscription. So we will not be charging for any of the public IP addresses in your subscription. All everything is free. And apart from that, we'll help you migrate 25 workloads which are non-SAP into the Azure. So these are the additional benefits from what you're getting already in the standard benefit package. So our main idea was to create this offering is because no, we wanted customers to feel comfortable that everything is being taken care of. We are going to cover your entire journey from the assessment phase till the implementation phase, and not only from the implementation, but we are also providing the remote annual support as well. So in that way, the customer will be able to adopt the cloud to complete 1 year and will get the confidence of building their own team strength, and then will be able to make a smooth transition from on-premises to cloud. So this is the main idea behind it in creating this solution offering, and the benefits I think are very much clear. And I'll be sharing these particular slides with you after this webinar as well, so that you can go through them, you can understand them, and also if you have any questions, you can reach out to our marketing team. They'll be able to give you a clear picture of what exactly is being covered and what exactly is being excluded from this particular aspect, right? There are other slides as well, which are basically talking about assessment phase, what is being covered, and we also have a deploy phase, and we also have a migrate phase. But this is not important. This is something which I've already covered it. I'll share you the slide. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining.